The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place that looked peaceful from a distance. A patchwork of gabled roofs, quiet porches, and maples that bled red in autumn. The river cut a silver line through the valley, and on still mornings mist would rise like ghosts who'd forgotten where they were supposed to go. No one ever locked their doors here. No one thought they needed to. When Ethan Walker arrived, the house on Maple Street had already been waiting for him, sagging slightly at the porch, its paint the color of ashes, its windows staring blankly at the woods beyond. The real estate agent spoke fast, avoided eye contact, and left before the ink on the papers dried. Ethan barely noticed. He was a man trying to start over, and starting over, he believed, meant forgetting where you came from. He spent the first week cleaning. Dust clung to his sleeves, cobwebs webbed the corners, and every board seemed to sigh beneath his steps. At night, the wind moved through the eaves with a slow, hollow hum. Sometimes he thought it whispered his name. On the 10th day, he opened the basement door. The stairs groaned like something old and tired. The light bulb at the top flickered, then held. Below, the air was damp, a breath of stone and rot. His flashlight carved tunnels through the dark shelves with broken jars, a rusted tricycle, the frame of a mirror so clouded it reflected nothing. And then, in the farthest corner, something caught the beam. A metal barrel. Its surface was eaten by rust, the lid fused shut. He stepped closer, heart hammering, though he didn't know why. The barrel seemed wrong. Heavy, even for its size, as though it was filled with something that resisted being moved. His fingertips brushed the iron. Cold seeped into his skin. The smell faint, but there was sweet, like earth after rain, but deeper, older. He tried to shift it, and the metal scraped against the concrete floor, a sound that made the hairs on his arms rise. Beneath the noise, he thought he heard something else, the faintest sigh like air escaping lungs long sealed. He stumbled back, knocking over a box. Glass shattered. Silence followed. When he finally climbed the stairs, his breath came short. The house seemed different, heavier. Every shadow longer, each corner dimmer than before. He left the basement door open that night. He didn't go back. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, painting the floor in gold. For a brief moment, Ethan wondered if he'd imagined it all, the smell, the sound, the chill in his bones. But the unease didn't fade. It grew. By noon, he called the sheriff's office. When Detective Claire Monroe arrived, she carried the kind of calm born from too many tragedies. Her badge caught the light. Her eyes did not. The basement swallowed them both as they descended. The lid came off with a groan. Inside, something soft shifted, a faded blanket, and beneath it, the shape of a body small enough to break your heart. Claire's breath left her in silence. Years of experience had taught her to keep her face still, her voice steady. But inside she felt that familiar tightening, the one that came when innocence met death. She pulled back, nodded to the forensics team. Ethan stood by the stairs, his hands shaking, though he didn't seem aware of it. Outside, the wind changed. Maple leaves drifted across the cracked sidewalk, spinning slowly to the ground. The hum of voices gathered, neighbors behind curtains, cameras being lifted, a town beginning to murmur. By evening, yellow tape wrapped around the house like a warning the town had waited decades to deliver. Ethan sat on the porch as dusk fell. The world around him had turned unreal, the sirens gone, but their echo still clinging to his ears. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the sun bled into the horizon. He thought of the basement, the dark that had looked back at him, the cold that had moved like breath. He closed his eyes and wondered for the first time if he'd bought more than just a house. Inside, the barrel stood empty now, but the space it left behind seemed somehow worse. If this story moves something within you, remember to subscribe and stay with us till the end. There are things buried in Willow Creek that should never have been found. The body was taken away before dawn. What remained was the silence, thick, unbroken, heavy as fog. Detective Claire Monroe stayed long after the others left. She stood at the edge of the basement, eyes tracing the rusted outline where the barrel had once rested. The space was circular, darker than the rest of the floor, like the house itself was bruised. Outside, the air smelled of rain. A single maple leaf clung to the front step vanes, glistening in the gray light. Claire watched it shiver, and for a moment she thought of her daughter the way small hands could cling to anything when they were afraid. The forensic report came in that afternoon. Human remains, female, estimated age between 7 and 9. Death undetermined. There was no record, no missing person in the county that matched. No parent had ever come knocking, no search party ever combed these woods. In Willow Creek, children grew up, moved away, and were forgotten. The town had a habit of letting things fade. Claire drove to the archives, a one-room annex beside the courthouse where dust outnumbered answers. Files from the 1990s were brittle-curled at the edges. She flipped through names, faces, headlines long since yellowed. Fires, floods, births. Nothing about a lost child. When she asked around, most people shrugged. Nothing ever happened here, they said. You must be thinking of another town. But someone remembered. Robert Kane had owned the Maple Street house before Ethan. He lived now at the edge of town in a small cabin swallowed by pines. The path to his door was lined with rusted tools and silence. When Claire knocked, he opened it slow, a man built of shadows and cigarette smoke. "You were the last to live there," she said, "before the sale." He nodded once. His voice, when it came, was coarse. "That house, it doesn't let go easy." They sat opposite each other by the fire. Claire's notebook stayed closed. Robert stared into the flames. "My brother came." "One winter," he said finally. "Daniel, he had a little girl with him, Jennifer, sweet kid, quiet." He paused, thumb brushing the rim of his glass. They stayed a few weeks. Then they were gone. Gone where Claire asked. He shook his head. Didn't ask. Daniel wasn't the kind you questioned. He carried storms with him. You learned to stay out of their way. Claire studied him. You never reported them missing. Robert's laugh was short, bitter. "People come and go, Detective. Some just don't come back." Rain tapped against the window, steady as a heartbeat. In its rhythm, Claire felt something off, not deceit exactly, but weight. Guilt shaped like fatigue. When she stood to leave, Robert didn't follow her to the door. His eyes stayed on the fire. Some things, he murmured, are meant to stay buried. Back at the station, Ethan waited, hands clasped tight. He looked thinner, as though the last few days had stripped him down to bone and breath. Claire told him what she knew, which wasn't much. He listened, eyes fixed on the floor. That night, the DNA results arrived. Claire read them twice. The male genetic trace found on the blanket matched a name, Daniel Kane, the brother. But Daniel had been dead since 1998, a car crash outside Portland. Burned beyond recognition. The records were clear. A dead man, she thought, doesn't kill twice. She stared at the report under the sterile glow of her desk lamp. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on the chest. Outside the window, streetlights blurred in drizzle, turning the world to watercolor. Ethan's voice echoed from earlier that day. "You think he brought her there?" Claire hadn't answered then. She still couldn't. There was something about the case that didn't fit, not just the timeline, not just the silence. It was as if everyone had agreed unconsciously to forget the girl, to erase her, a whole town complicit in memory's decay. That night, Claire dreamed of the basement. She saw the barrel again, but this time it wasn't empty. It stood open, and from its depths came a faint, steady humming. The sound of something small breathing. She woke before dawn, heart knocking against her ribs, the echo of that sound still lodged in her ears. Down the street in his own house, Ethan sat awake too. The floor creaked above him, though no one walked there. In the reflection of the window, he thought he saw movement behind him, a child's silhouette watching. When he turned, the room was empty. Morning came slow dripping through the clouds. The town carried on mailboxes, coffee gossip. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The peace that Willow Creek once wore like a badge now felt like a lie one told so often it had become true. And somewhere below in the hollow of the earth, the truth waited patient and unblinking. Rain gave way to fog, and Willow Creek slipped into silence again, the kind that feels chosen. Detective Claire Monroe parked beneath a street lamp that buzzed faintly against the damp air. The town seemed smaller now, its streets curling inward like a secret. Curtains moved as she passed. Doors clicked shut. Everyone had seen something. No one wanted to remember. She began visiting the neighbors one by one. Most greeted her politely, some with the brittle courtesy reserved for strangers bringing bad news. None looked her in the eye for long. When she mentioned the name, Kane expressions hardened. That old house, they'd say, as if naming it might summon something. At the far end of Maple Street stood a cottage overgrown with ivy. An elderly woman answered her knock, Agnes Miller. Her hair was white and thin, her eyes sharp with the clarity age sometimes grants to those who've lived too long. Claire asked about the Kanes. Agnes hesitated, gaze drifting toward the road. "I remember the brother," she said, slowly. "Daniel. Temper that one. The girl, though." A pause soft as breath. She used to wave. Every morning. Had a red scarf. It was winter, I think. Claire leaned forward. "Do you remember the last time you saw her?" Agnes nodded, but her eyes had gone far away. It was late, past midnight. I couldn't sleep. My husband used to snore. I looked out of the window, saw headlights parked outside that house. Bright, too bright. Someone was standing by the car, a man. Then another figure came running from the porch, small, maybe the girl. They got in, the car drove off. Never saw them again. Her voice trembled, the memory shaking loose after years in the dark. I told myself it was nothing. People come and go. That's what we do here, we stay quiet. I thought... She stopped. The silence filled in what her words couldn't. Claire thanked her and stepped outside. The air pressed heavy against her chest. Headlights. A child. A car that never came back. In the archives, she checked again, no missing reports, no school records, no photograph. It was as though Jennifer Kane had never lived at all. The town had erased her line by line until even memory had given up. That night, Claire drove to the edge of town. The forest loomed black trees whispering secrets to the wind. She parked near the clearing that overlooked the river. From there she could see the glow of Maple Street, small, flickering, fragile. Somewhere below, Ethan Walker's porch light was still burning. He sat outside most nights now, unable to sleep. The house behind him seemed to breathe its timbers, shifting softly. Sometimes, when the wind turned, he thought he heard footsteps, light unhurried circling just beyond the door. He didn't go inside to check. They said Willow Creek was a safe place, but safety is a kind of blindness, a decision not to see what hides beneath the floorboards. If you've stayed with us this far, don't forget to subscribe. And follow the silence where truth once spoke. Some stories aren't told because they're forgotten. Others are forgotten because they're true. The next morning, the coroner confirmed what Claire already feared. The remains were from the mid-1990s. A child, 7 years old. Cause of death, undetermined. Evidence of restraint, faint, but there. And inside, the blanket strands of red thread fibers from a woolen scarf. Claire closed the report and pressed her palms against her eyes. Red. Agnes had said red. A small detail, but enough to breathe life back into a ghost. She returned to the house that evening. The door hinges groaned as she stepped in. The basement waited below, hollow and still. The mark where the barrel had rested was darker now, damp spreading along the concrete. She crouched, touched the edge. Cold, slick. For a moment she thought she heard a faint hum, the sound of tires on gravel fading into distance. Then only silence. Ethan joined her. He looked pale drawn. "They said the girl was 7, he whispered. "Same age my daughter would have been." Claire glanced at him. In his eyes she saw reflection, grief recognizing grief. Two strangers bound by something neither could name. "Do you think she was scared?" he asked. Claire didn't answer. The truth would have been cruel. Outside, the fog thickened. The street lamps flickered their light, bending in the mist like tired halos. Somewhere a dog barked sharp and distant. The town exhaled, and in that breath was guilt. Long after Claire left, Agnes Miller sat by her window, watching the street. Her hands shook as she held her tea. The headlights she'd seen all those years ago, she could still picture them. White, searing, unforgiving. And every night since she had prayed for them not to come back. The results arrived on a Monday morning, the kind of morning when the air sits heavy and the clouds refuse to break. Claire Monroe stood in the evidence room, the paper trembling faintly between her fingers. DNA from the blanket, a perfect match. William Kane, the cousin, the quiet one, the man who lived 2 streets over and never missed Sunday service. She remembered his face from the photograph, standing slightly behind the other's, hands folded, eyes distant. A man content to vanish behind louder souls. Now his name whispered through the station like a rumor no one wanted to repeat. Claire found him in his garden pruning roses. The shears clicked softly, rhythmically, as though he couldn't hear the world ending around him. "Mr. Kane," she said. He turned calm, polite. "Detective." She told him why she'd come. The words hung between them, fragile as glass. For a moment, William didn't move. Then, slowly, he set the shears down. "DNA," he murmured. "Is that what it takes now?" To remember, Claire didn't answer. He invited her inside. The house smelled of dust and old paper, the scent of someone who'd spent a lifetime avoiding company. He poured tea, but neither of them drank. "You think I killed her," he said. "Not a question. I think you know more than you've told anyone." He stared at his hands. Knowing isn't the same as meaning to. Silence settled. Outside, wind brushed through dry branches, a sound like breath slipping from the earth. When Daniel came to town, William began. He was desperate. He brought the girl Jennifer. Said he couldn't leave her with her mother. They fought always. He needed somewhere to stay. I told him no, at first. My house wasn't built for children. He laughed, said neither was his heart. He smiled faintly, then the smile broke. He left her with me one evening. Said he'd be gone a day, maybe 2, but he didn't come back. William's gaze drifted toward the window where light fell in weak stripes across the floor. She was frightened. I told her everything would be fine, that her father would return, but she cried. She wanted to leave to run back to her mother. I didn't know how to calm her. I wasn't used to... He stopped. His throat worked, but no sound came. When she tried to go, I stopped her. It was supposed to be just for a moment, but she screamed, and I... His voice failed again. Claire closed her notebook. There was nothing left to write. The ticking of a wall clock filled the room. Each second landed like a drop of water on stone. William pressed his palms together, trembling. I thought I could fix it, hide it. Daniel would come back and I'd tell him she ran away. But Daniel never came. He died that winter. I buried her in the only way I knew, out of sight, out of memory. I sealed the barrel and prayed. He looked up at her eyes rimmed red, and you know what's worse, Detective? I stopped seeing her face. After a few years, I couldn't remember the sound of her voice. She became... quiet. Claire felt something crack inside her, not pity, not anger, but recognition. A mirror she hadn't asked to look into. "How long did you think you could keep it hidden?" she asked softly. William's reply was barely a whisper, until the house forgot. Outside, the sky began to clear. Light spilled across the porch like a truth that had waited too long. Claire stood her badge, catching the glow. "You'll need to come with me." He nodded. "I know." As they stepped out, the breeze carried the scent of roses. Ethan Walker waited by the gate, his face pale drawn. Claire hadn't called him, but somehow he'd known. When William passed, their eyes met. In Ethan's there was no hatred, only the hollow ache of a man who had seen too much loss to crave vengeance. William paused. "I never wanted to hurt her." Ethan's voice was low. "We never do." The patrol car pulled away, gravel crunching beneath its tires. Dust rose behind it, hung for a moment in the sun, then vanished. Claire stayed behind, staring at the empty road. The wind rustled through the maples, scattering a few pale leaves across the ground. For years, this town had been silent. Now it was whispering again, not loudly, but enough. That night, Claire sat alone in her kitchen. The cup of tea before her had gone cold. Across from her the chair was empty as it had been for a long time. She thought of William's trembling hands, of Jennifer's red scarf, of the way Ethan looked at the basement like a man staring into the grave he might one day share. There were no villains here, not really. Only people who failed at being human in different ways. When she closed her eyes, she saw the barrel not as evidence but as a confession too heavy for words. And somewhere, faintly, a child's voice hummed a lullaby that had outlasted its singer. Snow arrived early that year. It fell soft and soundless over Willow Creek, covering roofs, fences, and the scars the earth had tried to hide. By dawn, the whole town looked clean again, white, still innocent. From a distance, you'd never know what lay buried beneath. In the courthouse, the air was thin. Reporters filled the benches, their pens poised their breath, ghosting in the cold. William Kane sat at the defendant's table, shoulders slumped, eyes unfocused. The weight of years hung around him like frost. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, William rose slowly. His voice was small, the voice of a man who'd long since run out of anger. "I don't ask forgiveness," he said. "Not from you, not from her. I only ask that she be remembered properly this time." The room held still. Even the scribbling stopped. Claire Monroe watched from the back. Her coat dripped melted snow onto the tiled floor. Around her, the hum of justice felt hollow gavel strikes couldn't mend what silence had built. But still, the truth had been spoken, and in its wake there was space for grief, for guilt, maybe even for grace. Outside, Ethan Walker waited on the courthouse steps. He hadn't come for spectacle. He came because the story had begun with him, and endings he believed should be witnessed. When William was led out in cuffs, their eyes met again. No hatred, just the exhausted understanding of two men who knew what it meant to carry ghosts. That night, Willow Creek went quiet once more. Not the old quiet, the kind built from denial, but something softer, closer to peace. Ethan returned to the house on Maple Street one last time. The key turned in the lock, though he no longer felt the weight of ownership. Inside, the air was dry and cold. The basement door hung open. He stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into darkness. The space where the barrel once stood had dried, now a pale ring marking the floor, a scar the house refused to heal. In his hand, Ethan held a folded letter. It had been found inside one of Daniel's old boxes. The paper was brittle edges, eaten by time. The handwriting was a child's uneven, hopeful. "Dear Daddy, I like it here. The trees are big. Uncle William says they sing at night. I miss Mommy. Can we go home soon? Love, Jennifer." Ethan read it twice, then placed it gently on the step. His eyes burned not from tears, but from the ache of knowing how fragile life becomes when no one listens. He whispered into the empty air, not sure who he was speaking to. "You can rest now." A draft stirred the page, lifting it slightly before letting it fall back into stillness. Claire visited him the next morning. She didn't knock. He didn't mind. They sat on the porch watching snow drift through the maples. The world seemed muffled, like every sound was being swallowed by the cold. "Do you think they'll remember her?" Ethan asked. Claire took a long breath. "For a while. And then—" She turned to him, eyes steady. "Then it's our turn to remember." Down the street, church bells began to ring, slow, solemn, fading into mist. Somewhere a child laughed, chasing a dog through the snow. The sound rose and vanished, carried off by the wind. As Claire stood to leave, she glanced once more at the house. Its windows caught the light glimmering faintly beneath the frost. For the first time, it didn't look haunted, just tired. On her drive out of town, the road curved along the ridge where the forest met the valley. From there, she could see all of Willow Creek, a handful of roofs, smoke curling from chimneys, the river winding through white fields. She slowed as headlights approached from the opposite direction, a single car, pale beams cutting through the snow. For a moment, they illuminated the old house below the one on Maple Street. The glow lingered, caught in the glass before fading back into night. Claire smiled faintly. Maybe it was just the light. Maybe it was something more. If this story has found you, if you've walked with us through the quiet and the cold, remember to subscribe. Some truths are small, but they need witnesses to stay alive. Back in town, Ethan closed the door behind him and turned off the porch light. The snow continued to fall patient and unhurried. It covered the steps, the yard, the path to the basement layer after layer like forgiveness. And beneath it all, Willow Creek slept.